Alberta's Battle River Crowfoot by-election is heating up after Pierre Poilievre faced off against 9 other candidates in a Camrose debate on Tuesday, telling voters that sending him to Parliament would give rural Alberta a megaphone on the national stage. Meanwhile, locals are ridiculing a ballot-stuffing stunt that's left Elections Canada scrambling to accommodate more than 200 names on the ballot. Also, Albertans could soon be signing competing referendum petitions, one for independence and one to remain in Canada, after both questions were approved by Elections Alberta. In Calgary and Edmonton, bike lanes are once again a flashpoint, and Alberta is celebrating the sharpest crime drop in the country, even as the province blames Ottawa's bail laws for putting dangerous offenders back on the streets. All that and more on this week's Alberta Roundup. I'm your host, Isaac Lamoureux, and let's dive right into that first story. So Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is making the case that Battle River Crowfoot voters can turn their local concerns into national priorities by sending him back to Ottawa. At a candidate forum hosted by the Camrose Chamber of Commerce on Tuesday, Poilievre faced 9 opponents in front of an estimated 500 people. He told residents that while a party leader spends much of his time traveling the country, having a leader as their MP would give the riding a, quote, very powerful megaphone. He said, quote, "I'll be honest, having a leader of a political party as your local member of parliament is a trade-off. On one hand, the leader, in truth, lives in hotel rooms and low-budget hotel rooms across the country. The other side, though, is that a leader can bring a very powerful megaphone to the local issues of the community." Palev listed issues he said mattered to rural Albertans, but needed national leadership to achieve, like pipelines to the West Coast, protecting firearm rights, scrapping electric vehicle mandates, lowering immigration, cutting taxes, and supporting farmers. He said, quote, "These local issues require strong national leadership, and it would be the privilege of my life to provide both the local representation and the national leadership for the community." He also blamed inflation on government spending, arguing that Ottawa is fueling demand with out-of-control immigration and money printing, while restricting supply with excessive regulation and blocked resource projects. In fact, Palev actually called for negative population growth in Canada, along with cuts to foreign aid and stopping welfare for fraudulent refugees. The debate featured a wide spectrum of voices, including candidates from 8 federal parties and 2 independents. NDP candidate Catherine Swampy acknowledged she could not win the Conservative stronghold, but argued that Canada should accept more refugees, even those rejected by U.S. authorities. Liberal candidate Darcy Spady praised Prime Minister Mark Carney's policies, but was repeatedly booed. And other candidates pitched separatism, libertarian economies, proportional representation, or grocery price controls. And True North actually hit the ground in Camrose and Stettler on Tuesday and Wednesday to speak with residents about the upcoming by-election. And while speaking with them, 3 key themes emerged. That was, residents were appreciative and very fond of former Conservative MP Damien Currick, who stepped down for Poilievre to run, the longest ballot committee, no one had good things to say about that, and an overwhelming support emerged for Pierre Poilievre. The riding is, of course, one of the safest Conservative strongholds in the country, where Damien Currick won with 83% of the vote in the recent federal election before he stepped down for Poilievre. Residents described his resignation as, quote, very honorable, with many saying that they appreciated his years of service and respected him greatly in his decision to make way for Palev. Jim Abel, a man who lived in Stettler for 5 decades and actually helped Kirk get elected by introducing him to local businesses, said he expects Palev to garner a similar vote share in the 80th or higher percentile. And at Tuesday's forum, where the debate took place, Palev actually said he was being mentored by Currick, along with the Conservative MP who held the riding before him between 2000 and 2015, Kevin Sorensen. And in fact, actually, Currick was in the crowd at the forum. Another woman who volunteered at the Conservatives' local office told me that Currick was still very involved despite stepping down. None of the locals that spoke with True North had one positive thing to say about the longest ballot committee. In fact, some recurring words that were used by interviewees were stupid and ridiculous. Abel said, quote, "It's a joke of our democracy. It's not right, and it shouldn't be allowed." Another woman said it was ludicrous and that it made her very angry. Elections Canada has ordered special write-in ballots for this by-election, as the ballot was set to be over 2 meters or 7 feet long to accommodate the now over 209 candidates. And apparently, if the spelling is close to accurate, then the vote will be counted. However, it will also not suffice to simply write Conservative instead of Pierre Poilievre's full name, despite him, of course, being the only Conservative candidate. But True North asked every single interviewee when I was in Stettler and Camrose to try and spell Poilievre, and only one got it correct. So hopefully that doesn't cause any problems. For our next story, we'll cover the conflicting referendums, because Alberta's sovereignty debate is heating up as dueling referendum petitions take shape, each with very different hurdles. The Alberta Prosperity Project filed its official constitutional petition with Elections Alberta back in May, but asked Elections Alberta to hold on to it until Bill 54 was in effect. It officially became filed on July 4th. The question asks, quote, "Do you agree that the province of Alberta shall become a sovereign country and cease to be a province of Canada?" And under the new rules passed in Bill 54, the Alberta Prosperity Project has 120 days to collect roughly 177,000 in-person signatures based on 10% of the ballots cast in the last provincial election. The group has already reported more than 250,000 pledges from Albertans who say they intend to sign, and Premier Danielle Smith has promised that if the APP clears the threshold, she will place the question on a ballot in 2026. However, recently, Elections Alberta has referred the petition question to the Court of King's Bench for constitutional review. And leaders of Alberta Prosperity Project have accused the agency of using, quote, delay tactics, with general counsel for the project calling the rival petition filed by Thomas Lukaszuk a, quote, mischief application. And Justice Minister Mickey Amery actually sided with the separatists. He said, quote, "Albertans have a democratic right to participate in the citizen initiative process. They shouldn't be slowed down by bureaucratic red tape or court applications." And the rival petition from Lukaszuk comes from Forever Canada, which he leads. Their question asks, "Do you agree that Alberta must remain in Canada and any form of separation be rejected?" But unlike the APP, Lukaszuk filed before Bill 54 was proclaimed, meaning his group faces a much higher bar. 293,976 signatures in only 90 days. One other thing I wanted to highlight just quickly was Elections Alberta told True North that Lukaszuk's requirement was based on 10% of provincial electors on the post-election day list of electors. And according to Election Alberta's website, legislative or policy proposals require support from 10% of electors, while constitutional referendum proposals must meet a higher threshold, 20%, which would be 587,952 signatures, or the more widely cited target of 600,000 signatures. Therefore, Elections Alberta considers Lukaszuk's question a legislative or policy proposal, not a constitutional referendum. And you might remember that Jeffrey Rath said, quote, "The question is not a proper referendum question to be used on a constitutional issue. Furthermore, to the extent that the question seeks nothing more than to preserve the status quo, it is not a suitable question for determination through a citizens' initiative referendum." Alongside its petition, the Alberta Prosperity Project unveiled a sweeping fiscal plan that says it proves Alberta would thrive outside Confederation. According to its 44-page report, Alberta currently sends $68 to $75 billion to Ottawa each year, while receiving only $22 to $26 billion in return, resulting in a net loss of up to $47 billion. An independent Alberta, however, it claims could generate $4.71 trillion in revenue between 2025 and 2045, saving nearly $700 billion, creating as many as 450,000 jobs, and generating around $1.4 trillion for the Heritage Fund. The plan calls for scrapping provincial and federal income taxes, eliminating the GST, and creating a new Alberta dollar backed by oil, gold, and Bitcoin. It also proposes strict balanced budget rules, deporting non-citizens convicted of crimes, and building an Alberta pension plan with $167 billion in assets transferred from the CPP. With both petitions moving forward, Albertans may soon find themselves signing sheets for two opposite futures, one that breaks away from Canada and one that reaffirms the Federation. For our next story, we're actually going to talk about bike lanes. So, Transportation Minister Devin Dreeshen is once again weighing in on Alberta's bike lane battles, this time applauding Calgary's Mayor Jyoti Gondek for her sudden change in tone. Speaking in Airdrie after meeting with her, he said, quote, "I was pleasantly surprised that Mayor Gondek has the view that bike lanes are temporary. She said even though the concrete barriers may be made out of stone, they can obviously be removed." So I think that commitment by Calgary, at least for right now, is a step in the right direction. Dreeshen argued that bike lanes disadvantage the vast majority of commuters. He said only 2% of Calgarians use bike lanes, while of course 98% face congestion despite having no use for them. Dreeshen explained that instead of taking lanes away for cyclists, further congesting traffic, The province planned to spend $700 million on Calgary's Deerfoot Trail to add more lanes and reduce the daily commute of residents by 20%. The Transportation Minister added that City Council's removing traffic lanes for bike lanes has caused, quote, traffic congestion and chaos, and it slows down people's daily commutes and actually makes their life worse. Also, Alberta often sees snow for 8 months of the year, meaning the bike lanes only are used for a third of the year. Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Chris Sims, told True North that $100 million is dedicated to the bike lane infrastructure in Edmonton between 2023 and 2026, which costs $11 million per year to maintain. Meanwhile, she added that Edmontonians have seen property tax increases to accommodate these bike lanes, and at the same time, the mayor of Edmonton has a higher salary than the province's premier. She said, quote, "So this is a huge waste of money. The vast majority of the time, very few cyclists actually use these lanes, and it's going to cost a ton of money to remove these lanes, because it's not as if these are a couple of pylons and some green paint." So this is, again, another example of city governments being terrible with people's money and making really unpopular decisions. Of course, municipal elections are coming up in Alberta on October 20th, 2025. And Sims actually said that Gondek's sudden change in stance is likely because she's getting into election mode. She said bike lanes could become an election issue. Edmonton mayoral candidate Rahim Jaffer has said that he would halt the expansion of bike lanes in Edmonton if he was elected. One Edmonton community submitted a formal petition to the city council with a clear majority of residents opposing bike lanes in their neighborhood, but it was ignored. The province, of course, could override a municipality and halt the bike lanes. Sims celebrated the fact that Alberta actually has referenda at the municipal and provincial levels, and she said that if a referendum occurred on bike lanes, she expects that 80% of residents would be in opposition. And if a referendum occurred in Alberta's major cities and bike lanes were voted against, the municipalities would have to get rid of them, but if they didn't, the province could step in and force them to. Dreeshen said that bike lanes can be good, but should never come at the expense of driving lanes. He said, quote, "That's not proper or smart city planning." And for our next story, we'll stick with the Alberta government, but move a bit more federally because Alberta is celebrating a major victory in its fight against crime. But it's also saying that Ottawa's policies are still failing Canadians. According to Statistics Canada, Alberta's police-reported crime severity index fell 9% in 2024, more than double the national average of 4%. The province's overall crime rate also dropped 9%, marking the steepest decline of any province. Officials say the results highlight Alberta's investments in policing and community safety. Public Safety Minister Mike Ellis praised frontline officers but pointed to the federal bail policies as a continuing problem. He said, quote, "These local successes stand in stark contrast to the ongoing inaction from the federal government, whose policies have broken the bail system, allowing violent, repeat offenders back on our streets, contributing to a national increase in crime." And the Conservative Party took it a step further, drawing attention to longer-term trends. Since 2015, gun crime nationwide is up 130%, violent crime up 55%, homicides up 29%, and sexual assaults up 76%. The party said, quote, "After the first 3 Liberal terms of reckless, soft-on-crime policies, Canadians are less safe, criminals are less afraid, and our streets are less secure." The Conservatives also highlighted a few recent criminal cases that were of notable concern. In one, a man murdered his wife just hours after being released on bail. In another, a man attempting to buy sex from a 15-year-old received only 3 months of house arrest. And Ellis said Alberta would continue lobbying Ottawa for bail reform. That wraps up this week's Alberta Roundup. My name's Isaac Lamoureux. Have a great weekend. Thank you, and God bless.